Hello again, gamers. Welcome back to the Board Game Captain. I'm the Board Game Captain, and today I'm going to be reviewing and talking about Fallout Wasteland Warfare, the role-playing game. So, Fallout Wasteland Warfare, the role-playing game, is produced by Modifius Entertainment, and this game was designed by Jim Sheehan, and the campaign in the back, there's a 3-game campaign included in this book, that is by Jim Johnson, and then there are lots of people in on additional material because there are a lot of people that worked on this game. So I'm just going to show the people there, all the people responsible for this role-playing game. So, now, way back in 1974, a couple of people named Gary Gygax and Dave Arneson created Dungeons & Dragons. Now, you might be saying, why are you talking about Dungeons & Dragons while you're holding a copy of this modern role-playing game, Fallout Wasteland Warfare? And that's because there's a very interesting similarity in where both of these games came from. You see, the very first modern role-playing game, Dungeons & Dragons, actually was originally published as an expansion to the tabletop miniature war game Chainmail. And in fact, in the first edition of Dungeons & Dragons, it did not even include a combat system. It specifically referenced that you needed to get this other game, Chainmail, to do the combat. Now, this is a standalone expansion to the tabletop miniature war game Fallout Wasteland Warfare. Now, it does fully contain everything you need to play except the dice. You do need special dice for this game. So if you have not purchased Fallout Wasteland Warfare, the miniatures game, which comes with those special dice, the bare minimum of what extra you will need is a set of the custom dice that will be needed to play. But the combat system is in here. But it is very interesting to me that in a bit of a callback to the very first modern role-playing game, Dungeons & Dragons, like that game, this also evolved out of a tabletop miniatures war strategy game. And now I'm going to reference that occasionally while I'm doing this review in how this has influenced this rule system. So first off, what do you get when you buy specifically Fallout Wasteland Warfare, the role-playing game, tabletop storytelling in the Wasteland? So when you get this book, you get a nice hardbound, thread binding, full color book, which let me just show a couple of the pages here. I mean, these are really nice. They did this grainy off-white color for the pages, lots of full color pictures of the miniatures, which are also available from Modifius Entertainment for both this game and the miniature game. And the book has a nice cloth bookmark. So this is very well produced. But in addition, when you get this, you get a key, which I'm not going to show because it's got my personal key on it, to download a digital copy of this book, which I think is great because it's very helpful for printing out tables and references as well as character sheets. Though they also do give you a free download of a character sheet. And on the Modifius website, they also have tons of free downloadable stuff, including cards for weapons and chems and all sorts of things that you're going to want to use because there's a very interesting card-based system in here. Now, in the book, Fallout Wasteland Warfare, the first thing you have is an introduction. Now, this is pretty standard. This is the what is a role-playing game introduction. It gives you an idea, if you've never played a role-playing game, if this is your first role-playing game, what are you actually in for? Then you've got section 2, which is the world of the Wasteland. This is the background area. Now, this goes from page 4 to page 17. So as you can to page 19. So as you can tell, that's not a very huge section. It gives you a brief overview of the world, some specific references to various things from both the Bethesda Fallout games and the pre-Bethesda Fallout games, references to things going on in California as well as the Capital Wasteland, and even stuff in Boston, which of course references the Fallout 4. There's lots of references, but they're brief, they're small, because I think, one, they are taking for granted that if you're playing this game, you've probably played one or two of the video games and know the gist of what the post-apocalyptic United States is like in the Fallout universe. And two, they're also going off of the fact that the Fallout post-apocalypse is a bit of a sandbox where almost anything can happen, and there's plenty of the country that has been so far yet undefined. I mean, most of the video games usually take place on one of the coasts, so if you wanted to set your game in the ruins of, say, Detroit or Chicago or St. Louis, you'd be wide open to make it whatever you want, because I don't think any of the games, at least to my knowledge, have been set in those areas. And this is good for that. So they give you just a basic gist of what's going on. What are some of the powers out there, like the Brotherhood of Steel, the Institute, a little information about super mutants, the vaults, etc. Then you get into creating a character. That is the third section in the book. So now, character creation is a bit interesting in this. You see, character creation in this game is a little bit unique. It very much, and this is one of the areas where I really have to reference the fact that this comes from a tabletop miniature game. It's very tactical. You start with a unit card, which sort of takes the place of a character class in this. The unit cards are general concepts of what you want your character to be, and your character can be anything from a vault dweller to a super mutant, and even a Mr. Handy. You can even be a Mr. Handy. And they've got a couple pages here full of all the various character cards that you start with. Now, you print out one of these cards, and what you're going to do is you're going to put this on your character sheet, which gives you your base stats, and then you have extra abilities and perks and things you can get which alter those stats, which will also be on your character sheet, as well as other cards you can slide underneath the character sheet and only be showing partially for when you use chems or have specific armors like power armor, etc. Any of the human characters can also be made a ghoul, by the way. So you can be a human, you can be a ghoul. As a human, any human can be a ghoul. Could also have been a raider. You can be a super mutant. Hopefully an intelligent super mutant like some of the ones shown in certain of the Fallout games. And you can also be a Mr. Handy, which is one of my favorite options. I love the ability to actually be one of the mechanical denizens of the wasteland, and that is really cool. Now, the next section, after character creation, after you have finished creating your character, is the rules of play. And this is one of the biggest sections in the book. They go into great detail. This is a very crunchy game. There's a lot of rules, a lot of mechanics. The basic rules for skill tests have to do with rolling the skill die. So first you got to roll a skill die, and the skill die is this 20-sided die, but it's not a normal D20. This game uses entirely custom dice. Like I had mentioned before, mostly D12s of various types and colors. The colors differentiate what type of D12 it is, as well as a 20-sided die that both has numbers and special symbols. Now, you're rolling the D20 and you're trying to get equal to or less than your skill. So as I show here, there is a little illustration here of the skill part of the card that you would have for your basic character card that you start with. So if you're trying to shoot someone, it is a perception-based skill, and your skill in this example is a 7, as you can see there. So you want to roll a 7 or less, which a helpful little table here tells us we have a 65% chance of succeeding with a stat of a 7. Now, there are X's on here, which are auto fails. There are gear points on here, which give you action points, which you can use to do quick actions later on. Another part of the very tactical way this game works. And there are exclamation points, which are auto successes and give you a critical point. You don't immediately get a critical hit, but you can spend that critical point later to decide when you want the critical hit to happen, which is something that is very different in this game from a lot of other role-playing games. Usually criticals are just totally random and they happen right there whether you need it or not. Your enemy might be on their last hit point. In this, it's much more strategic in that you can save your critical point and spend it later, which is really neat. Now, the extra specialization in certain skills, as well as certain weapons, which also will give these, as well as certain advantageous positions that your game master will allow, will give you bonus dice of these various 12-sided varieties. Now, the bonus dice all do various different things. So the black bonus die is most likely to have extra damage on an attack or extra effect on a skill roll. You see it has lots of these burst symbols, tons of them, even multiple burst symbols on some sides, as well as a few other things like these Nuka-Cola bottles and some -1, which makes a skill more likely to happen, because what it does is it does a -1 to your die roll, making you more likely to succeed. But the burst symbols are by far the most common. And the most common way you use those burst symbols is in combat, because in combat they mean extra damage. So if your gun does 2 damage, but you roll a double burst symbol, it's now doing 4 damage for this hit, which is very useful, especially for overcoming armor, which we'll get to in a moment. Now, yellow dice, when they get added, yellow dice make you more likely to break armor, at least for this one hit, to bypass armor. They have tons of these little broken helmet symbols, and in a combat roll, these allow you to ignore that many points of armor. A double broken helmet symbol will avoid 2 points of armor, while a single will avoid 1 point. This die also has some -1s, which again make the roll more easy to happen, as well as some Nuka-Cola bottles, and even some blast hits there. I think it has just one of those. But most common on this is making you easier to bypass armor or bypass extra difficulty in a non-combat based roll. Because sometimes, you might hit the door real easy, but the door has its own armor class and you still need to break armor. Now, the green dice are far more likely to help you with accuracy. They, again, have armor breaks and bursts, but they've got -1s, -2s, and even -3s to really aid you with making that skill roll more successful. And the blue dice are crazy. The blue dice are crazy. And when I say crazy, they're also crazy awesome. The blue dice are covered mostly in stars and nuclear effects and Nuka-Cola bottles. They got all these weird effect symbols. And generally what these are, and there's a few of these as I showed on some of the other dice, but they're rarer. This is literally covered in these. These are all sorts of special effects, generally for equipment, most often for weapons. Weapons will tell you if you roll these, you get like these super crazy effects. They could be things like a laser weapon setting someone on fire, or a freeze gun freezing someone. These are just really cool when you have a weapon that has triggers for these. So getting a blue die in those weapons is so amazing. It's so awesome to do. So then when you're hitting something, they now similar to having to roll the number or less for the skill die, the target will have to roll their armor stat or less on the armor die. The armor die is a red die that has 1s, 2s, 3s, and 4s on it. The higher your armor stat, of course, the more likely you are to succeed. So an armor stat of 3 is very likely to succeed. And whatever number you roll, if it succeeded, so if you, let's say your armor is 2, and I roll a 1, I will negate 1 of the damage coming at me. However, if my opponent had rolled a green die and had rolled a 1 break armor, then that 1 will be negated, and all the damage will be taken by my NPC. Let's say I'm game mastering, they're going to get hit for all that damage that was rolled. So that's a general idea of how the system works. It's very crunchy, and a big part of it is liking to get specializations to get those extra color dice, as well as, of course, raising your stat to make you more likely to hit to begin with. Now, the next section after the rules of play is the overseer section. So this is almost like a mini game master's guide. It gives you lots of explanation as to what you're going to do as the overseer. The overseer is what they call the game master in Fallout Wasteland Warfare, the role-playing game. It gives you lots of ideas on how to adjudicate various skills and bonuses, as well as hindrances, how to create storylines, etc. I mean, if you have looked in one Game Master's Guide of any other game, you probably have a general idea of what's in here. But this is GM or Overseer's eyes only. So if you're a player, don't be looking in this section. It's not for you. The next section after that, which also if you are just a player should not be reading, is the mini campaign that this game comes with. It comes with an introductory campaign called Parzival and the Wasteland Knights. Not giving anything away about this campaign, mind you, in case you want to play it. So spoiler free. It's just you get introduced to a quest by a Mr. Handy named Parzival, and you go on a series of 3 games which really help to give you an idea for the feel of the world. And then after that, as the game master, you could either grow out from that campaign or make your own campaign in said world. This is really great. I love that they included 3 full games, and there's a fair amount of information here because it's roughly like 29 pages, 28 pages worth of information for those 3 games. So there's lots of stuff there. Then we have some appendices in the back, which just give you an index on all the various icons and what they mean, as well as a standard index and a gallery of miniatures. Now, that's everything that's in this book. This is actually a fairly short book for a role-playing game, again, because they managed to keep the storyline stuff fairly tight, because they know that you probably know a good idea about the world and where you are. The entirety of the rule book, including appendices, is a total of only 137 pages. But it is full color printing. The production is lovely. The binding is marvelous. The cloth bookmark is fantastic. There's not a lot of artwork in here. There are some bits that obviously are meant to look like the the bobblehead artworks from the Vault Boys, though for the different sections. But instead of artwork, they generally have very well painted terrain and miniatures from the war strategy tabletop miniature game, sometimes with a little bit of photoshopping to make gun blasts and such happening with them. And those look great, and they're very thematic, and especially very much encourage the sort of feel that you're going to have with this game, that this game is definitely meant to take advantage of miniatures, and maybe some terrain, or some, battle mats out to look like the post-apocalypse that you're going to run around on. It might behoove you to buy a battle mat or 2 that look like various bits of the wasteland, and they are selling some bits of terrain, including like a nice Red Rocket gas station, which looks awesome, that you can paint up and put on the battlefield, and you can get some of the miniatures, and you could use them both for this and for the war strategy game, and that's really cool. Is it possible to play this game without miniatures? Yes, but that's going to require a little bit more work. Everything in here is really angled towards using this as a role-playing game with miniatures, having the miniatures out to be able to tell range, to be able to tell if you have line of sight. They do say you can do it theater of the mind, but they don't really spell out a lot of how to do that. It's really much more a afterthought that, yes, you can play this theater of the mind if you want to, but in reality, this is going to be a very crunchy, very tactical game. You're meant to have a miniature that represents you on the battlefield, just like old school D&D. Again, a reference there, because of course old school D&D originally evolved out of a tabletop miniatures game just like this one did. And in point of fact, you're probably, if you're playing this game, going to be very tactical and strategic, both about your character creation and about your character advancement. So, okay, where am I at with this game? I'm going to give this game 8 out of 10 stars. I think the system is actually quite fun. I love getting the extra colored dice, especially the blue ones. I'm a big fan of the blue dice. I like getting those. I like the tactical and strategic nature of character building in this. Now, any game can be role play heavy. You, as a group, can do lots of role playing, whether it is a game that is angled towards role playing and less on the crunchy side, or a game that is super crunchy. Just because it's crunchy doesn't mean you have to have a role playing group full of murder hobos. This is not a thing that is mandatory in a super crunchy game. I think there's this sort of negative stereotype that people have, where if you're in a super crunchy game with tabletop miniatures where it's a lot about combat, that everyone's just going to be murder hobos. That's only if you have a bunch of people that specifically want to be murder hobos. I mean, you could still do everything very character-based, but be strategic about how you build your character, which also makes sense, in my opinion, for how people would be in the post-apocalypse. You know, your character who is working as a mercenary, let's say, is probably going to spend a heck of a lot of time practicing with their new firearm that they just discovered versus, learning to basket weave. I mean, it's just the sort of way you would be in the post-apocalypse. So now I'm giving this 8 stars, but I'm giving it with a couple of caveats, because I do know that games that are this crunchy and this tactical and this strategic, especially because of how it came out of a tabletop miniature game, can be a bit divisive. Now, if you are hardcore against super crunchy, super rules heavy games like this, this might not be the game for you. If you like the really rules-light games and like to just focus on role-playing and not rolling dice for everything, this might not be the game for you. It is super crunchy. In addition, and this is something that I also know can be very divisive, the custom dice. Some people get very upset by a game requiring you to buy a whole new set of custom dice, and this game does. You do not use any standard dice for this game. Every one of the dice, even the armor die and the standard, the D20 that they use, are not standard dice. These are custom, completely, totally, all custom dice. So if you are okay with the custom dice, which I say can be an issue because some people don't like having to buy the custom dice, but at the same time, these are pretty awesome. I love all the special effects and special effects symbols, and they're really fun. But if you are super anti-custom dice, this also might not be the game for you. Now, on the other hand, if while role-playing, whether you want to get super into character development or not, you also enjoy strategic sides of strategic role-playing and crunchy role-playing game systems, which are a bit of a callback and throwback to older school role-playing, and you enjoy the fun custom dice symbols and also the card system where you can slide cards in for the chems and then later decide if you got to roll to see if your character became addicted to that chem, as well as sliding in cards for your power armor and your weapons, and you have all the special stats for your weapons which get triggered with the special dice, and you strategically level up to give yourself more ability with those energy weapons, then this would be the game for you, because that in that regard, this game is really awesome. This game is a lot of fun. But again, if you want to play it from that tactical mindset, you kind of have to have already that tactical mindset to enjoy the style of game that this is. So there you have it. It's going to be 8 stars out of 10 from me. Let me know if you have played Fallout Wasteland Warfare, the role-playing game, or if you've played the Wasteland Warfare tabletop miniature game, which I have not tried yet. Again, a big thank you to Modifius Entertainment for giving me this review copy of the role-playing game. It's really cool, and I very much enjoyed it. And you know what? If you're into custom dice and tactical role-playing, I can definitely recommend this game to you. So, if you have any questions, comments, or concerns, either on the Fallout Wasteland Warfare role-playing game, or this video, feel free to put them in the comments down below. And if you enjoyed this review on this role-playing game and you'd like to see me do more role-playing game reviews like this, be sure to give it a like, share it on all forms of social media, and if you haven't already, please subscribe to the Board Game Kaptain. That's Kaptain spelt with a K on YouTube. And until next time, game on.